Don't let him leave." The cold command froze the entire restaurant. A terrified young man had barely reached the exit when more than 30 tattooed gunmen blocked every door. I just asked her to dinner." He raised both hands in panic. Across the room, a curvy young florist stared in disbelief. "Damiano, please don't." The ruthless man slowly stood. He was Damiano Moretti. At only 33, he ruled the Moretti Syndicate, America's most feared mafia empire. His icy eyes never left the terrified man. Then he asked the curvy florist one quiet question. "Is he the reason you smiled at someone else today?" The first person Chloe Parker greeted every morning wasn't a customer. It was the sleepy orange tabby that insisted on waiting outside her little flower shop before sunrise. "Good morning, Mr. Pickles," she laughed, crouching to scratch behind his ears. "I hope you're planning to supervise instead of stealing my ribbons again," the cat answered with a lazy meow before strolling inside as if he owned the place. Chloe shook her head with a smile. Most people imagined florists spent their days surrounded by romance. The truth was far less glamorous. There were 5 o'clock flower market runs, buckets heavy enough to bruise her arms, thorns that never seemed to miss her fingers, and delivery boxes she somehow managed to trip over at least twice a week. At 28, Chloe had accepted that clumsy simply came with her personality. She laughed when she spilled water. She apologized to flower pots after bumping into them. She once knocked over an entire display of tulips because she turned around too quickly while waving goodbye to a customer. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her for 2 things: her beautiful flower arrangements and her inability to walk 10 steps without nearly causing a tiny disaster. Fortunately, people found it adorable. Children loved visiting her shop because she always let them keep the flowers with broken stems. Elderly couples stopped by just to hear her cheerful stories. Even exhausted office workers left smiling after spending only a few minutes around her. Chloe had a rare gift. She made people feel lighter, without ever realizing she was doing it. Around 9 that morning, the little bell above the front door chimed. She looked up automatically. "Welcome to Parker Bloss." Her words stopped. A tall man, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal overcoat, stepped quietly inside. Every movement was calm, every step measured. He removed a pair of black leather gloves before looking around the shop with the same quiet attention he gave every visit. No bodyguards, no assistants, no expensive entourage, just one impossibly handsome customer who arrived almost every Friday. "Good morning," Chloe said warmly. "You came early today." Damiano Moretti offered a small nod. I had time. His answers were always short, never unfriendly, simply economical. For nearly a year, he had visited her shop with remarkable consistency. Sometimes he bought roses, sometimes lilies, sometimes orchids, sometimes flowers Chloe couldn't imagine anyone needing. He never explained who they were for. Oddly enough, he never asked for gift cards either. After arranging the bouquets himself, he simply paid and left. Chloe secretly wondered if he owned the loneliest mansion in America. Who else bought fresh flowers every single week without fail? She smiled to herself while selecting white ranunculus. "The peonies are especially beautiful today. I'll take them. All of them. Yes." She blinked. "There are almost 60 stems. They won't go to waste." She laughed. "You always say that." For the first time that morning, the corner of Damiano's mouth lifted ever so slightly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was enough to surprise her. "There it is," Chloe pointed playfully. "I knew you could smile." Damiano looked away, pretending to study a vase of hydrangeas. "I smile." "You absolutely do not." "I do. I've seen happier statues." A brief silence followed. Then, incredibly, he let out the faintest chuckle. It lasted barely a second, but it transformed his entire face. Chloe grinned triumphantly. "I win." Damiano simply reached for his wallet. "You charged extra for making customers laugh." "Not yet." "Perhaps you should." She wrapped the enormous bouquet carefully in soft ivory paper. As she handed it over, curiosity finally defeated her. "I've always wondered something." Damiano looked at her. "Who receives all these flowers?" For just a heartbeat, his eyes stayed on her. "You do." Chloe frowned. "What?" He glanced toward the bouquet. "The shop. The flowers make it look nicer." "Oh." She laughed again. "I thought you said I do." "I misspoke." She accepted the explanation without another thought. Damiano, however, knew perfectly well he had not misspoken at all. Every bouquet had always been for her. Not to own, not to impress. Simply to make sure the little flower shop she loved never looked anything less than beautiful. Because somehow, seeing Chloe smile among fresh flowers had become the quietest part of his entire week. Neither of them noticed the black SUV parked discreetly across the street. Inside, two enormous men exchanged confused glances. Boss smiled again. One whispered, "I saw it. He only smiles here." The other guard sighed. If the captains ever found out the Don spends Friday mornings buying flowers just to hear one florist tease him. He couldn't even finish the sentence. Both men burst into silent laughter. Neither realized that this peaceful little routine was only days away from changing both Chloe's life and the future of the entire Moretti syndicate. By Monday morning, Damiano had convinced himself of one thing. He absolutely did not have feelings for Chloe Parker. He simply enjoyed buying flowers. Every Friday, for nearly a year, from the same florist. At exactly the same time, his consigliere, Luca Romano, didn't believe a single word of it. "The quarterly shipping report can wait," Luca said as he followed Damiano through the marble halls of Moretti Tower. But apparently, the flower schedule cannot. Damiano didn't even look up. The roses bloomed differently this season. Luca blinked. "Boss." Silence. "You own 3 international shipping companies." Another silence. "You've negotiated with heads of state." Nothing. "You once ended a gang war in 12 minutes. Still nothing. But you're now discussing flower seasons." Damiano finally stopped walking. They matter to her. Luca closed his eyes. There it is. Not flowers. Her. He wisely decided not to continue the conversation. Even the fearless consigliere knew better than teasing the Don too much. Across town, Chloe was finishing a sunflower arrangement when her best friend Emily burst into the shop, carrying 2 coffees. "You'll never guess what happened." Chloe laughed. "You say that every Monday." "This time, I mean it." Emily placed a paper cup on the counter. "Remember Ethan? The accountant? The handsome accountant." Chloe rolled her eyes. "You've called 6 different men handsome this month." "Because they were." Emily leaned across the counter dramatically. "He asked about you." Chloe nearly dropped a vase. "What?" "He came into the bakery yesterday. We talked for almost 20 minutes. And I accidentally mentioned you're single." "Emily." "What?" "He seemed nice." Chloe shook her head, already blushing. "I don't even know him." "You could." "I've been busy. You've been hiding." Emily smiled knowingly. "The Chloe. When was your last date?" Chloe opened her mouth, then closed it again. She honestly couldn't remember. Running a flower shop left very little room for romance. Most evenings ended with sore feet, flower petals in her hair, and invoices waiting to be finished. Emily softened. "You deserve someone who makes you smile, the way you make everyone else smile." Before Chloe could answer, the bell above the door chimed. Both women turned. Ethan stood awkwardly in the entrance, holding a small paper bag from the bakery. "Oh," Emily whispered. "My timing is incredible." The young accountant cleared his throat. "Hi, Chloe." She smiled politely. "Hello. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." He looked adorably nervous. "I know this is unexpected, but would you maybe like to have dinner sometime?" Emily immediately found something extremely fascinating to organize in the back room. Chloe laughed quietly. Poor Ethan looked ready to faint. "I'd like that," she answered gently. His entire face lit up. "Really? Really? Friday night, 7 o'clock, La Rosa restaurant? That sounds perfect." After he left, Emily ran back out, practically screaming. "You have a date!" Chloe covered her burning face. "It was just dinner. It was a date. Dinner. Date. Dinner." Emily pointed triumphantly. You smiled. Meanwhile, 40 floors above the city, a meeting involving nearly $2 billion had just begun. Executives projected profit forecasts. Lawyers discussed acquisitions. Captains reported security operations. Damiano listened quietly, until his phone vibrated once. Only 3 people possessed that private number. Luca, his head of security, and Marco, the man assigned to watch over the flower shop. Damiano excused himself without explanation. "What is it?" Marco hesitated. "Boss?" "Speak." Miss Parker accepted a dinner invitation. Silence. A man named Ethan Collins. More silence. Friday evening. The conference room suddenly felt several degrees colder. Executives exchanged nervous glances through the glass walls. Everyone recognized that expression. It was the face Damiano wore before hostile takeovers, or wars. Luca slowly entered the hallway. "Problem?" Damiano slipped his phone into his pocket. "No." "Boss?" "No. You've used that exact tone before purchasing an entire shipping company." Damiano adjusted his cufflinks. "What restaurant?" "La Rosa." Luca's eyes widened. "No." Damiano calmly walked back toward the conference room. "We've been considering acquiring the Bellucci Hospitality Group." "Boss." "They own La Rosa." Luca rubbed both temples. "You are not buying a restaurant because Miss Parker has a date." Damiano opened the conference room door. "I agree." Luca sighed with relief. Damiano looked over his shoulder. "I'm buying the entire hotel group." Luca stared after him in complete disbelief. Somewhere across the city, Chloe Parker was happily wondering what dress she should wear on Friday, completely unaware that America's most feared mafia boss had just decided to purchase a multi-billion-dollar hospitality company because another man had invited her to dinner. Friday finally arrived. For reasons Chloe couldn't explain, everything seemed determined to ruin her first date in almost 2 years. She overslept. Mr. Pickles knocked over an entire bucket of daisies. A delivery truck arrived 3 hours early. Then, just before closing, the zipper on her favorite blue dress broke. Emily stared at the ruined dress. "You have got to be kidding. I think the universe hates romance." Emily folded her arms. "No. The universe owes you one." 30 minutes later, they found another dress. Simple, elegant, soft green. It matched Chloe's eyes perfectly. When Chloe stepped out of the fitting room, Emily smiled. "Ethan won't survive." Chloe laughed so hard she nearly tripped over the mirror. At precisely 6:45, Ethan arrived outside La Rosa restaurant, carrying a bouquet of tulips. He looked nervous. He had spent nearly an hour choosing flowers. "Good evening," the hostess greeted him warmly. "Reservation for Ethan Collins." The young woman checked her computer. Her smile suddenly disappeared. "I'm terribly sorry, sir. There seems to be a problem." Ethan frowned. "My reservation was confirmed yesterday." "Yes, it was." But approximately 30 minutes ago, the restaurant was reserved in its entirety for a private corporate event. What? I'm very sorry. It wasn't our decision. We were informed only moments ago. Ethan looked around the dining room. It was completely empty. No guests, no decorations, no music, just waiters standing awkwardly beside perfectly prepared tables. This doesn't make any sense. I know. I'm truly sorry. Across the street, inside a black SUV, Luca slowly lowered his binoculars. He looked toward the man sitting beside him. You actually did it. Damiano continued reading financial reports. What? You bought Bellucci Hospitality in less than 48 hours. It was an efficient acquisition. You closed the restaurant. There are 23 other restaurants downtown. Boss. I fail to see the issue. Luca stared at him. You sabotaged the man's date. I prevented an unpleasant dining experience. There wasn't going to be an unpleasant dining experience. There might have been. Luca sighed. You know, if anyone else behaved like this, I'd recommend psychiatric evaluation. Damiano calmly turned another page. Noted. Outside the restaurant, Chloe arrived carrying a small handbag. She immediately noticed Ethan arguing politely with the manager. What happened? Ethan forced a smile. The restaurant closed. What? For a private event. Chloe looked through the large windows. It looks empty. It does. She couldn't help laughing. I'm so sorry. I promise I'm not cursed. Ethan laughed too. I was actually thinking exactly the same thing. For a moment, the disappointment disappeared. There must be somewhere else. Of course. He pulled out his phone. The Italian place across the park has openings. He booked a table. Success. Or so they thought. 20 minutes later, the kitchen lost power. I'm terribly sorry. Their third restaurant, a burst water pipe. The fourth, emergency health inspection. The fifth, closed for a celebrity charity gala. By the sixth cancellation, even Chloe had stopped laughing. She looked toward Ethan apologetically. Maybe this is a sign. He rubbed the back of his neck. I don't usually lose 6 restaurants in one evening. I don't usually destroy this many plans either. They both burst into helpless laughter. Neither realized. Every cancellation had been caused by the same phone call. Luca stood beside Damiano on the rooftop terrace of Moretti Tower. I've informed the restaurants. Damiano nodded. Good. They're beginning to ask questions. They were compensated. They received triple their nightly revenue. Then nobody lost money. Luca looked toward the city lights. You realize this has become ridiculous. Damiano remained silent. You could simply ask her to dinner. Silence. You've negotiated peace treaties between rival syndicates. Silence. You've intimidated senators. Silence. You've acquired half the waterfront. Still nothing. But asking one florist to dinner terrifies you. Damiano finally spoke. What if she says no? Luca blinked. For the first time in 15 years, he saw fear. Not fear of bullets. Not fear of betrayal. Not fear of losing billions. Just the fear of rejection. You know what the strange part is? Luca said quietly. I've watched men tremble because you looked at them. But the only person capable of frightening Damiano Moretti is a woman who still thinks you buy flowers because you like gardening. Even Damiano couldn't argue with that. Meanwhile, after abandoning restaurant number 6, Ethan smiled sheepishly. I know this sounds ridiculous, but would you settle for pizza? Chloe laughed. Honestly, that sounds perfect. They walked toward a tiny neighborhood pizzeria. No reservations, no luxury, no chandeliers. Just 2 ordinary people trying to salvage an impossible evening. Several blocks away, Marco's phone rang. Boss, they're going to Antonio's Pizza. Damiano slowly closed his eyes. Antonio's wasn't part of Bellucci hospitality. He didn't own it. For the first time that night, he had absolutely no way to interfere. Luca looked at him with unmistakable amusement. So, the date is actually happening. Damiano said nothing. He simply watched the city through the window, completely unaware that somewhere else in New York, two rival mafia captains had been studying the surveillance reports on Chloe Parker. One of them quietly placed a photograph of the smiling florist onto the table. So, this is the woman. The only woman who can distract Damiano Moretti. The older boss smiled coldly. Find out everything about her. Because if the great Damiano finally has a weakness, we're going to use it. The following Tuesday, Damiano walked into Chloe's flower shop, carrying his usual black coffee. Only today, someone else was already there. Ethan. He was helping Chloe carry several heavy boxes of imported roses from the delivery truck. Easy, Chloe laughed as Ethan nearly lost his balance. I told you these boxes were heavier than they look. I refuse to lose a fight against flowers. She giggled. You've already lost. Damiano stopped in the doorway. For a brief second, he watched Ethan instinctively steady Chloe when she stumbled over a loose piece of cardboard. She smiled at him. Not the polite smile she gave customers. A real one, the kind that reached her eyes. Something unpleasant tightened inside Damiano's chest. He had spent an entire year creating reasons to see that smile. Now another man was receiving it effortlessly. Good morning, Chloe waved happily. You came at the perfect time. Damiano approached slowly. I did? She nodded enthusiastically. Ethan was just telling me he knows absolutely nothing about flowers. I know enough to avoid the pointy ends, Ethan admitted. Chloe laughed again. Damiano silently placed his coffee on the counter. Mr. Moretti, this is Ethan. Ethan extended a friendly hand. It's nice to finally meet you. I've heard you're Chloe's most loyal customer. Damiano looked at the offered hand for a long moment before shaking it. Barely. Ethan smiled. She says you buy flowers every Friday. I do. You must have someone very special. Before Damiano could answer, Chloe interrupted with a grin. I've been trying to solve that mystery for almost a year. Damiano's gaze settled on her. I haven't decided. Chloe tilted her head. On the flowers? On the person? She frowned, trying to understand. Then another customer entered the shop, and the conversation ended before she could ask anything else. That evening, the executive conference room at Moretti Tower was unusually tense. Not because of rival syndicates, not because of the FBI, not because of money. Because every senior captain had quietly noticed one impossible truth. Their terrifying boss was distracted. One captain cleared his throat. Boss, the Romano family has been purchasing additional weapons. Damiano nodded absent-mindedly. Another captain spoke. The Volkov syndicate moved $3 million through Miami yesterday. Another nod. Finally, Luca closed the reports. Everyone out. The room emptied immediately. Once they were alone, Luca leaned against the conference table. You almost approved a shipping contract that would have cost us $80 million. Damiano remained silent. You never make mistakes. Another silence. So tell me honestly, is this about Chloe? Damiano looked out across the city lights. I watched another man catch her before she fell. Luca blinked. That's what has you distracted. He knew she'd lose her balance. Because she's clumsy. He smiled before it happened. Because he knows her. The room became quiet. Finally, Damiano admitted the one truth he had avoided for months. I am too late. Across town, Chloe and Ethan's second date was going much better. No restaurant closures. No mysterious emergencies. No impossible coincidences. Just a walk through Riverside Park with coffee in their hands. I had fun last Friday, Ethan admitted. Even with the restaurant disaster. So did I. They stopped near a flower garden overlooking the river. Ethan hesitated. I was wondering. Before he could finish, a black van rolled silently onto the path behind them. The side door slid open. 3 masked men jumped out. Everything happened in seconds. One man slammed Ethan to the ground. Another grabbed Chloe. She screamed, "Ethan!" He struggled desperately. "Run!" A sharp blow sent him crashing against a park bench. The kidnappers shoved Chloe into the van. The tires screamed across the pavement. And then, they were gone. 5 minutes later, Marco's phone exploded with calls. He was the first Moretti security officer to arrive. Ethan staggered toward him, blood running from a cut above his eye. They took her. Who? I don't know. They knew her name. They weren't robbers. Marco's face drained of color. He pressed one emergency button on his encrypted phone. It connected instantly. "Boss," Damiano answered calmly. "What is it?" There was a pause. Marco had served the Moretti family for 18 years. He had delivered news of shootings, bombings, assassinations. Nothing had ever frightened him like this sentence. "They have Miss Parker." Silence. Complete silence. Then Damiano asked one question. "Is she hurt?" "We don't know." Another pause. When Damiano spoke again, his voice contained no anger, no panic, no emotion at all. "Activate Black Protocol." Marco's heart skipped. Black Protocol had only been authorized twice in Moretti history. It meant every available resource of the syndicate would move with one objective. Nothing else mattered. Within 60 seconds, more than 8,000 soldiers received encrypted alerts. Private helicopters began warming their engines. Shipping ports closed. Casino surveillance systems switched to facial recognition searches. Luxury hotels locked their security networks. Private security companies redirected hundreds of armed personnel. Every business controlled by the Moretti syndicate, legitimate or otherwise, immediately became part of the largest manhunt on the East Coast. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, the rival boss who had ordered Chloe's kidnapping smiled confidently. He believed he had captured an ordinary florist. He had no idea. He had just declared war on the single most powerful mafia empire in America. And before sunrise, he would learn exactly how terrifying a jealous man could become. When the woman he loved disappeared. When Chloe finally opened her eyes, she found herself sitting in a chair inside an abandoned greenhouse. The glass ceiling above her was cracked. Wild vines crawled over rusted steel beams. Hundreds of dead flower pots lay scattered across the floor. One of the kidnappers noticed she was awake. "Comfortable?" Chloe swallowed nervously. "Why am I here?" The man laughed. "Because you're the most valuable person in New York." "I think you've kidnapped the wrong florist." "Oh no. We spent weeks confirming your identity." Another man tossed several photographs onto the floor. They showed Damiano leaving her flower shop. Every Friday, every single week, for almost a year, Chloe stared at the pictures. "I don't understand." "You will, at that exact moment." Inside Moretti Tower, more than 50 captains stood around a massive digital map. Red dots spread across the entire East Coast. Every warehouse, every airport, every private marina. Every security camera connected to the Moretti syndicate had become part of the search. Luca looked toward Damiano. "We've narrowed the search to 12 locations. 12 is too many. We're eliminating them." Damiano nodded once. Then he turned toward the room. "I want every legitimate business we own operating at full capacity." The captains exchanged confused looks. One finally asked, "Boss, legitimate businesses?" "Yes." "Why?" Damiano pointed at the map. "Florists." The map. Silence. "Garden centers." More silence. "Commercial nurseries." Luca suddenly understood. The greenhouse. Damiano nodded. They took a florist. They won't hide her somewhere she can't survive. They'll choose a place she trusts. Every captain immediately began issuing orders. Within minutes, thousands of employees working for companies that had no idea they secretly belonged to the Moretti syndicate began searching abandoned greenhouses throughout 5 states. Back inside the greenhouse, the rival boss finally arrived. Victor Barone, leader of the Barone family. He smiled politely. "Miss Parker, I'm sorry about the accommodations. What do you want?" "You." She frowned. "I arrange flowers. You misunderstand." He picked up one of the surveillance photographs. "I don't care who you are. I care who loves you." Chloe looked at the picture. Damiano, standing quietly outside her flower shop, waiting until every customer had left before entering. It suddenly struck her. He had never once been in a hurry. Not once. Victor continued. "Do you know how many people have tried to discover Damiano Moretti's weakness?" She remained silent. "They searched his money. They searched his businesses. They searched his family. They found nothing." He smiled. Then one day, he smiled inside a flower shop. Chloe's heart skipped. "No, he doesn't." Victor laughed. "You really don't know." Meanwhile, Marco burst into the operations room. "Boss, we found one of the vans." "Where?" "Abandoned near an old botanical district." Damiano's eyes narrowed. "How many abandoned greenhouses?" 18. Luca immediately issued commands. "Deploy every team. Helicopters airborne. No sirens. No media. No mistakes." Damiano quietly reached for his jacket. Luca blocked his path. "You stay here." "No. If this is an ambush." I said no. For the first time in years, the 2 oldest friends stared each other down. Finally, Luca stepped aside. "You know every captain will follow you." "They always do. And if something happens to you," Damiano fastened the last button on his jacket, "then make sure nothing happens." 40 minutes later, the convoy stopped outside the abandoned greenhouse. Floodlights remained off. Helicopters circled silently overhead. Thermal drones transmitted images onto Luca's tablet. 7 armed guards, 2 on the roof. 5 inside. No visual on Miss Parker. Damiano accepted a pistol from Marco, then shook his head. No shooting, unless absolutely necessary. Luca looked surprised. "They have hostages." "They have hostages." "They have Chloe." Damiano corrected him quietly. "I'm not risking her life." Inside, Victor pressed a pistol gently against Chloe's shoulder. "He's here." She looked toward the broken windows. "You can hear them?" "No. I can feel him." Almost on cue, the front doors exploded inward. Armed men flooded the greenhouse. Before anyone fired, a calm voice echoed through the shattered glass. "Release her." Every head turned. Damiano walked inside alone. No weapon raised. No fear in his eyes. "Only absolute certainty." Victor laughed. "You actually came yourself. I told my men you would. You wanted me." Damiano stopped only a few feet away. "You have me. Let her go." Victor smiled. "I think I'll keep both." That single sentence was enough. More than 30 elite Moretti soldiers burst through every entrance simultaneously. The kidnappers barely had time to react. Within seconds, every weapon pointed at Chloe had disappeared. Victor found himself on his knees, hands restrained behind his back. Damiano ignored everyone else. He walked directly to Chloe. "Are you hurt?" She stared at him, not at the soldiers, not at the chaos, only at him. "You came. I always would." Tears filled her eyes. "You bought flowers every Friday." He smiled softly. "Yes, You closed restaurants. Yes. You scared away every man who asked me out. He sighed. Yes. You've been ruining my love life for almost a year. The hardened soldiers around them collectively lowered their heads. No one wanted to witness what came next. Damiano, the man feared by thousands, actually looked embarrassed. I may have overreacted. For 2 full seconds, Chloe simply stared at him. Then she laughed. Not because any of this was normal, not because it made sense, but because only one man in the world would buy an entire hotel company, simply because another man had invited a florist to dinner, and somehow that ridiculous truth made more sense than anything else. 6 months later, the old warehouse district on the East Coast welcomed a very different grand opening. Where abandoned buildings had once stood, a breathtaking glass conservatory now stretched across several acres, filled with thousands of flowers from every corner of the world. The sign above the entrance read simply, Parker Conservatory. It had become the largest floral conservatory on the East Coast. Children wandered through butterfly gardens. Couples celebrated anniversaries among blooming orchids. Local schools visited to teach students about nature and conservation. When reporters asked Chloe how she had managed to build such an incredible place, she only smiled. I had a little help. Standing quietly in the back of the crowd, dressed in another perfectly tailored black suit, was Damiano Moretti. No bodyguards stood beside him today. No weapons, no displays of power. Just one man holding a single handcrafted bouquet. As the ribbon-cutting ceremony ended, he walked toward Chloe. She looked down at the bouquet and laughed. You didn't buy every flower in the city this time. Damiano shook his head. No. I finally learned something. She smiled. And what's that? He gently placed the bouquet into her hands. I spent a year trying to keep other men from giving you flowers. He took a slow breath. I should have been the one giving them to you. Then, in front of business leaders, politicians, longtime customers, and dozens of captains from the Moretti Syndicate, the most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast did something no one had ever imagined. He lowered himself onto one knee. The entire conservatory fell silent. Chloe Parker. I built an empire because I believed power could solve every problem. It couldn't. I bought restaurants. I bought flower suppliers. I even bought an apartment building. The audience burst into laughter. Damiano smiled sheepishly. Apparently, jealousy is a very expensive emotion. Even Chloe couldn't stop laughing. Then his expression softened. But there is one thing I could never buy. He looked into her eyes. Your heart. So I'm asking, instead, will you marry me? Tears shimmered in Chloe's eyes as she looked at the bouquet. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't made of the rarest flowers in the world. It was simply a small arrangement of white peonies, ranunculus, and wild daisies. The very first flowers she had ever recommended to him. It's beautiful, she whispered. I know, Damiano replied softly. I'm looking at it. Laughing through happy tears, Chloe wrapped her arms around him. Yes. The conservatory erupted in applause. Even Luca discreetly wiped at his eyes before pretending something had gotten into them. Months later, when people asked Damiano Moretti what the greatest investment of his life had been, they expected him to mention ports, casinos, or billion-dollar companies. Instead, he always gave the same answer. A tiny flower shop, because that's where I finally learned that the strongest man in the room isn't the one everyone fears. It's the one who isn't afraid to love. If Chloe and Damiano's story made you smile today, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes that true love can appear in the most unexpected places. And tell us in the comments. If you were Chloe, how long would it take you to realize that someone had secretly been buying flowers just to see you smile? Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.